Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Neuro-Spectrum Conversations. I'm your host, Alyssa Pierce, and today we're talking all about school readiness and how families can help prepare their children for a successful transition into the classroom. Joining me today is Madi Miller from School-Based Behavior Consultation, or SBBC. We're going to discuss what school readiness really means, what their program looks like, and how it benefits both children and their families. Maddie, thank you so much for being here with me today and being a guest on the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me, Alyssa. I'm happy to be here.
That's awesome. I'm so excited to talk about this because, even though it is summer, school's right around the corner. So I think this is a perfect
Definitely.
time. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at School-Based Behavior Consultation?
Sure. So, like Alyssa said, my name is Madi Miller. I have background education from Ball State University. I have my undergrad in child development, and then my master's degree is early childhood education. And I've been in the field of ABA for almost 10 years now. I did an internship in college and fell in love with the field, and I wanted to figure out how to incorporate the education side with that autism side. And so that's kind of really how I started my position at SBBC. And with SBBC, I am the school readiness director. So that looks like planning curriculum for our clients and helping with those school transitions.
hmm That's really cool. So can you tell everyone a little bit about what SBBC is and the services your organization provides?
Yes, of course. So SBBC we have three different autism centers. I think we actually just opened up our fourth, and we also serve clients that are in school and in home, providing one-on-one direct ABA therapy, which is applied behavior analysis.
Okay, that's really cool. And where are those locations at?
We have the main location. We started off in New Palestine. We have reached out to Grant County. We are in Delaware County and most recently Howard County.
Okay, that's really awesome. I am glad that there is more people out there that, are opening up ABA programs because I think that it's very beneficial to help kids, especially when it comes to things like school readiness. So, when parents hear the term school readiness, what does that actually mean for some people who may not understand what that means?
Definitely. So, school readiness doesn't necessarily mean academics like some people might think that it means. It more so means just anything that we can work on to help get your child ready for school, whether that's transitioning, following a school schedule, social skills, learning
Mhm.
how to listen to a teacher, things like that.
Okay. Yeah, I know that some people associate school readiness with all things academic, but a lot of it, especially kids with autism, it's the social aspect of it, peer interactions and things like that.
Definitely.
So in like in that realm, so why is school readiness so much more than simply knowing like letters, numbers, colors, things like that?
It's so much more because when what we used to see is clients that attend ABA centers are really used to that one-on-one direct therapy. And
hmm
so what happens with that is they start to rely on their individual instructor. So when they make that school transition, it's really hard for them to learn that they're supposed to listen to the teacher and things like that. And knowing the skills to transition from classroom to classroom or learning how to interact with your peers is so much more than just learning, like you said, letters, colors, numbers,
hmm
etc.
Yeah. So, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges children experience, like when they transition into, preschool or kindergarten?
I would say the social skills is one of the biggest challenges, along with that group instruction. Like I mentioned, they get so reliant sometimes with ABA therapy to just respond to a certain individual. So that's why it's important to practice generalizing skills across different people, different settings to really get them ready to make that transition, to make new friends, things like that. Start them off with success.
Yeah. Well, my son is 4, so he's getting ready to be in school. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to get just prepare myself, emotionally, because that's going to be hard for
Definitely.
me. But he's so smart, and I know he will really, truly thrive in that environment and being around other kids. Do you think that sometimes it's just hard, especially for kids on the spectrum, to start that transition and be away from their families?
Yeah, it can be difficult for them to be away from families, like you said, familiar people too.
Hmm.
Um, I know that they can really get used to that certain person or certain couple of people that they're
Hmm.
used to working with. And also, usually classroom sizes are a lot bigger than what you would see at a
Yeah.
typical ABA center. So
Hmm.
even that is a lot,
Yeah.
emotionally and socially.
Yeah. So I definitely think that the school readiness also, like you said, with the transitions, I'm sure that that's a huge, important component of it is transitioning them from being home to being in a school setting, especially if they're going to be
Yes,
for a couple of hours, because kids,
definitely.
I mean, I know my son on the spectrum, he thrives on routine. He has to have it because that's just the way that his brain processes things. I know some of the kids are a little bit more flexible, but he has to know where he's going and who he's going to meet and what he's going to do. So,
Hmm.
I think that that is a really important part of it. So, could you tell us a little bit about SBBC school readiness program that you offer?
Yes. So we try to set our different classrooms up into different age ranges based on what's developmentally appropriate for each child. And what I do as the director is plan lesson plans and curriculum that actually ties in to some of the Indiana state standards. That way they're getting practice with what the teacher expectations will be at school. And then we have a structured schedule throughout the day where instead of them just having all of that individual time with their one-on-one therapist, they're transitioning into a classroom setting where we almost have a mock classroom set up with circle time calendar, a table with chairs, a sensory table, little cubbies for them to practice hanging up their backpack and things like that. So we really try to make a mock classroom and follow what a typical school day would look like in that setting to make this transition a lot easier.
Yeah. So, piggybacking off that, what does a typical day look like for a child in that program?
So a typical day, I'll go based off of more of the early learners that we have. They'll come in and they'll do breakfast and individual work with we call it an RBT, a registered behavior technician. And
Hmm.
then they'll come to my classroom and do circle time and music. And then they go to snack. They come back to me for social emotional. Then they go some of them follow their own individual schedule throughout the day too.
Hmm.
Um, then different activities I do throughout the day. We work on fine motor and practicing handwriting since a lot of them need to learn how to write their own name or at least recognize their own name. We do sensory, gross motor, and craft. And that's spaced out kind of all throughout the day between lunches, snack, individual work, things like that, so that they're practicing all of those transitions too.
Hmm. Yeah, that sounds really helpful for them, transitioning from each activity. Um,
Hmm.
I know my son, he struggles with transition, so we have to do a lot of prompting for him. But,
Yes.
I think also being in a group of kids, I mean, even if it's not like a super large group, it's still helpful to kind of have that model of another kid trying to transition to a task alongside them. So I think
Yes. We've
that's
noticed that that definitely does help. We've noticed like transitioning as a group makes
mhm,
it a lot easier for those who
mhm,
have a tougher time with those
mhm.
transitions.
Yeah. And I mean, like in just a mainstream daycare or preschool, a lot of the kids or the neurotypical children don't need as many visual or verbal prompting as
Yes.
kids on the spectrum. And my son really thrives on that, and he needs that because he has a hard time understanding, hey, we're moving on from coloring. We're going to go have snack because he's hyper fixated on the coloring. Um,
Yes.
so I know that being in that group of kids is probably going to be super helpful for the child to kind of model and see, oh, the other kids are going too. I guess it's my turn to go as
Most
well. So,
definitely.
yeah. So, how do you balance structured learning with play and natural social interactions?
A lot of the activities that we do, some of them almost feel like play without them really realizing that it's for an activity. Like
Mhm.
sensory, for an example, we'll do kinetic sand, shaving cream, Play-Doh, or have a big sensory bin that I change with the different themes that we have. And to them, they're like, oh, I'm just playing with Play-Doh right now, but they don't realize that they're really working on those fine motor skills and different things like that, to where play's kind of incorporated in each of those activities and lessons.
Mhm. Yeah, I actually saw a video the other day of I think it was an occupational therapist, but she was having the kid play with Play-Doh and like pulling the Play-Doh apart and, messing with the Play-Doh and pinching it. And it was like simulating how he would need to fasten buttons, like
Oh,
snap on buttons.
yes,
So I like that she made that visual for some people who may not understand why a kid would be playing with a toy, but how that would be helpful for daily living tasks. I thought that was a cool
definitely.
way. Yeah, I thought that was a really cool way of kind of explaining it to parents who may not understand that part of it. Because it does look like
Yes,
playing, but kids learn the best through play. So,
I would
you know,
agree.
yeah, it's it's crazy to think that playing with Play-Doh is going to help him learn how to snap buttons, but
Has so many benefits.
yeah, yeah, that's still a skill that they need to know, and it's helpful to start modeling that when they're young. Um,
Definitely.
yeah. So moving on to like the skills part of it, what
hmm
communication skills are especially important before starting school?
I would say, especially for like the autistic community, I think self-advocacy for our learners is really important. Um,
Mhm.
some of their peers at school may not be as familiar with, what autism is or what it looks like. And if we have a kid that is able to advocate for themselves, I think that that's really important to teach them those skills. Even
Mhm.
just functional communication for our kiddos. We actually work with a lot of kids that have communication devices. And so just teaching them how to properly communicate so that we can understand their wants and needs.
Mhm. That's awesome. My son uses a device and it's been very helpful for him. And I know quite a lot of my friends who have autistic children that use devices too. Um,
Yes.
yeah, so that's really cool that you are affirming of that version of communication because I mean, he's a Gestalt language processor, so he can talk in like chunks, but he
hmm
also learns through his AAC on the chunks that we have on there for him. And, he is in speech, but he's also learning how to talk through his device. So
I love
I'm a
that.
big, yeah, I love hearing that programs are communication affirming and they however the kid learns best, whether it's PEX
Yes.
cards or AAC or, sign language, whatever, I'm a big fan of that. So that's super awesome that you guys do that for them. Um,
Definitely. I've got a little card on my badge too that I carry around. It's like you
mhm,
said, different pictures
mhm.
where we're big on visuals too. Like even
Yes.
if you can communicate verbally and visually, like the more
Mhm.
input they get, the more
Right.
output that we'll receive.
Right. Yeah. Anything that helps give them that leg up to communication is I mean, my son uses all three. He verbalizes, uses AAC, he uses PEX cards, and he uses sign language. So
That's
we
amazing.
we get communication however we can get it.
I love it.
Um, so in regard to like social skills, how do you help children develop social skills like sharing or turn taking, and interacting with their peers?
Yeah. So when social emotional, we do that daily as one of my structured activities, and we'll do a lot of turn-taking games to practice that. Whether that's, a memory game or even a game that they have to, pass back and forth to each other, take turns. Um, and then also, even when they're not in my structured activities, if someone wants a turn with a ball, their specific therapist will prompt them to communicate and ask for a turn and practice sharing that way too.
Hmm. That's awesome. And then self-care as well. I know that that's a huge part of independence for kids with autism. So what kinds of daily living skills do you work on in your program?
So each client has, their own individual program, so they're all at different levels with these things, but we actually have an occupational therapist on site, and so they receive services through our OT, and then I collaborate with the OT to kind of help out and make sure we're on the same page with different targets that each child's working on, whether that's toileting, hand washing, brushing hair, brushing teeth, getting themselves dressed for the day. We work on basically all of that based on the individual needs.
Mhm. Yeah, that's really great that you individualize it for each kid because each kid is so different on what they're working
Hmm.
on. And I mean, that's true for any child, but specifically for autistic children, my son, he's not potty trained, so of course he's going to be working on that. So that may be completely different from another kid who needs help with like, washing their hands after they use the bathroom.
Yes.
So I think that that's a great skill to have. And especially learning that, like I said, in a group of children, sometimes just having that model is super helpful for them. Um,
Yes.
so in the emotional aspect of it, so executive functioning and emotional regulation can be difficult for a lot of kids. How like those skills incorporated into the program?
So we try to talk about different emotions and identify, when a peer is feeling a certain way. That
Mhm.
way we can put, an emotion with
Mhm.
the label. And then also
Mhm.
just having like a calm space that a child can go to where they feel safe, where they have maybe sensory toys. They can
Mhm.
look at an emotional regulation chart or different breathing techniques or calm down techniques that they can use
Mhm.
depending on what that child needs.
Mhm.
And that's kind of how we do it here at the center.
Mhm. Okay. I think that that's a great skill also to learn. Emotions can be hard sometimes. And I know for my kiddo, we over exaggerate our emotions sometimes to really show him the difference. And he's actually gotten very good about identifying, like, if I'm crying, he says, Mommy's sad. I was like, yes, buddy,
Aw.
that's right. Mommy is sad and mommy's crying. But that's huge for him that he did that all on his own. So I am very pleased that, as long as you're consistent with the skills that you're teaching these kids, they truly thrive with that as well.
Yes,
Um,
that's amazing.
yeah, it was super cool to, see him identify that, but also say it too, because I was just so pleased. I was not expecting that at all either.
I
So
love that.
yeah, I was like, wow, buddy. I mean, I'm sad about something completely different, but I'm happy that you
And
said
now I'm so
that.
proud of you.
Yeah, I'm so proud. Um, so I guess the last part for the skills part of it, what classroom routines do children practice before entering the school?
So, during circle time, they'll practice like staying in a designated area for a certain amount of
Hmm.
time because that's always expected, in the classroom.
Yeah.
Um, we try to line up together as a group and transition together, like we talked about
Hmm.
earlier, to
Yeah.
make that better. Um, Raising their hand when they're finished with a task to gain the teacher attention
Mm-hmm.
and also waiting on the teacher to respond, especially when there's a classroom full of kiddos.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Different things like that for our classroom routines, pushing their chair in. They have folders that they put their work in when they're completed. So turning that into the designated tray, like how you would at a teacher's desk at school, is basically all of that, like as much as we can think of that's similar
Mm-hmm.
to a school setting.
That's awesome. I think that that's super helpful for these kids to learn those skills because it's hard for them to, I guess, be self-aware that they have to do those things and
Mm-hmm.
kind of remember that they have to do those things. And, with a neurotypical kid, most of the time you tell them a couple times and they'll most of the time do it. They are still
Yes.
children and that's totally okay. But, a lot of times people on the spectrum, they're not as self-aware. And unless, like I mentioned before, the consistency is probably the most important part because being consistent with, having him do tasks and do them in the way that he's supposed to do them, I think that that is a great skill for these kids to, start honing in on, especially before they enter like a mainstream school.
Yes, I agree. That's why I
Yeah.
love our structured schedule so much too,
Hmm.
because they get so used to that routine and they know
Hmm.
what to look forward to, what's to
Yeah.
come next, and then they start to
Yeah.
really gain that independence.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned having circle time in your program, and a lot of, I think most schools in the area have a circle time and a snack time.
Hmm.
So keeping that consistency, even though it's in a school readiness program, it will still translate pretty well, I think almost perfectly well for just mainstream
Yes.
schools. So
Yes.
that's really awesome that the program caters to that as well, because, like I said, consistency routines are so important.
For
Um,
sure.
I know you mentioned that you do individualized programs for children. So how do you individualize the program to meet each child's strengths and needs?
That's a great question. So each child has a BCBA that works with them, and they have individualized goals that they're working on. Um, and I try to also, when it comes to the classroom setting, I try to individualize my lessons, even if they're all, say they're doing all the same color by number worksheet.
Mhm.
My expectations for one of them might just be trying to hold the pencil correctly or trying to
Mhm.
stay just on the paper and
Mhm.
attending to the paper that they're coloring. Before
Mhm.
maybe an older learner, I might expect they're following the directions of what number is which color and staying in the
Mhm.
lines and things like that. So just varying like writing utensils and different expectations for each client, even
Mhm.
if it's the same activity.
Mhm. Right. Yeah, and every kid is so different in how they learn too. So, one kid may be more visual and one kid may be more of a listening to verbal instruction. So I think that's another important aspect of just learning in general too. Um,
Yes.
especially for autistic kids, I still haven't identified how my son learns best, obviously, because we still have that communication barrier. But I've worked with
Mm-hmm.
kids before in like early learning centers, and we would try to like identify which kids, how they learn best before they entered into the school system. So I know
Yes,
that that's, yeah.
I've started learning who responds better to,
Hmm.
like you said, verbal prompts, my cue
Hmm.
cards, different
Hmm.
things like that. So even in individualizing the instruction
Hmm.
along with kind of like the task modification as
Hmm.
well.
Right. Yeah. So how do you measure progress throughout the program?
So when I mentioned that each client has an individual program from the BCBAs, we use like a data tracking system. And
Hmm.
so if they have those school readiness targets in their program,
Hmm.
their individual therapist can track data in all of those sessions while I'm leading the group. And then
Hmm.
we can go look at the graph and see how they're responding to different things and how their progress is monitored. And then also with like the speech and OT side of things, once
Hmm.
they do their sessions with the clients, I can tell them like what I've been seeing in the classroom, and we can collaborate and see, okay, are they ready for, this next step?
Yeah. That's really helpful to see, just visually tracking the kids' progress is super helpful in seeing like which areas they struggle in and which areas they are doing better in and which areas they might even, they don't even need those supports anymore because they're so far
Mm-hmm.
above it. I think just in
Yes.
general, seeing all the different aspects of it, especially from like a data perspective, that really helps parents kind of understand what they need to target more. So like in addition to that, how do you know when a child is ready to transition into a school setting?
So I'll use an example from last year before someone transitioned to school for the first time. The parent had basically asked me and the BCBA if pre-K or kindergarten would be the better fit. So I did a preschool assessment and a kindergarten readiness assessment to just see what level the client was at, and then presented that information alongside the BCBA to the parent, and kind of still let them make their own decision, because I didn't
Right.
want to tell them which one to choose, but I wanted to show them the progress and like where they were at with those skills. And
Right.
a lot of our kiddos too, they might already be in school and they could come to us half day or every other day. And so
Mhm.
if they're already in school, then I don't necessarily have to assess them and help figure out when to make that transition. But more so for those early learners, when they haven't been to school yet, I can kind of do an assessment, share with the families where
Mhm.
their kiddo is at, and let them make like an informed decision based on that information.
Right. Yeah, that's a great thing to let them kind of make that decision on their own. But
Yes.
also have that advice and, hearing from two different people on, just the data part of it and what you've observed, and then letting them make the best decision for their kid and giving them that control is helpful in the decision process for them, especially if they're first time parents. I know that
Mm-hmm.
that's very scary,
That's overwhelming. Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's like, is this going to be the right decision, the best choice for my child? So it can be a lot, but collaborating with the parents and kind of explaining it in a way that they can understand based on what their child needs, I think that that's amazing because some places don't offer that or don't offer as much information, in
Yes.
regard to that kind of stuff. So, um, with parents being such an important part of that process, how are families typically involved in the school readiness program?
So the BCBAs meet with all of the families. I believe it's twice a month, and
Mhm.
they go over any, parent training, any questions they might have, and review the program that we'll be implementing basically with their kiddo. And we have an open door policy where families can come in and observe and watch, their child throughout the day, see the classroom settings if they would like, which I think is really awesome that the doors are always open, because that,
Mhm.
you know, if I was a parent, I would want to be able to do that for my own child. So
Mhm.
that's kind of how they're involved with the readiness program.
Right. So, what are some things that parents can do at home to reinforce the skills that their child is learning?
Um, Kind of to go along with that, whatever they learn in that parent training from the BCBAs, it's very beneficial if parents do continue those things at home, because the more they're reviewing these skills or practicing, then the faster their child is going to progress. And
Mhm.
so I think just being open to, those new ideas that are being brought to them, and that'll help reinforce those skills in the home setting as well.
Yeah, that's really helpful to know. Do you offer parent trainings?
Like I said, the BCBAs will do that with the families. If they ever
Hmm.
want me to be a part of it as
Hmm.
the school readiness director, I'm happy to sit in on it. And then something new that we started this year is a summer survival guide. And
Hmm.
so once a month, there is a free webinar series that parents can
Hmm.
join and get information. The first one was, just like how to keep your child engaged and follow a routine and different coping skills for the summer since there's so much free time. So that's
Hmm.
a great resource if anyone would like to join those free webinars and
Yeah,
get some helpful information.
yeah, that's awesome. I think that
Mm-hmm.
that's a great resource to offer. You know, I know people want to enjoy their summers, but I feel like preparing, especially children on the spectrum, preparing them as much as you possibly can for school, I think that that's a valuable tool to have. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, definitely for sure. That is something that I think most parents would probably, or parents and caregivers would benefit from. Um,
Definitely.
yeah. So, what do you think are some common misconceptions that families have about school readiness programs?
Um, we kind of touched on it in the beginning where I would say that their mind probably jumps straight to like, oh, it's school, so it's academics and
Hmm.
things like that, without realizing that school readiness is just really any of those skills that will help promote that independence when their
Hmm.
kid does get to school. Those group instructions and classroom routines and schedules and things like that.
Hmm.
Um, I would say that's probably one of the biggest things.
Yeah. So another like common question, is this program only for children with autism, or can children with other developmental differences benefit as well?
Um, For our current center, you have to have an autism diagnosis
Hmm.
to be a client.
Hmm.
But I think that any school readiness program would be beneficial for any kind of learner, whether they're on the
Hmm.
spectrum or not.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure there are other school readiness programs out there, that may not be specifically for kids on the spectrum, but I know there are
Mm-hmm.
some other kids who struggle with like dyslexia or learning difficulties that I think that they would benefit from a school readiness program as well, whichever one is local to their area, just to
Yes, I would
kind of help,
agree.
yeah, just to kind of give them those skills and that confidence that they need to be prepared, because school can be really scary for children. They're in a new place with lots of new faces and lots of things going on around them. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that that would be a great tool for parents to utilize if they have one like in their area.
I
Um,
agree.
so, kind of in closing, what kinds of changes have you seen in children after they've completed a program?
I've seen a lot more independence, which is, I would say, what we're mostly looking for. We're always wanting to transition to the school setting. That's why we're called school-based behavior consultation. And then
Hmm.
eventually having their therapist be able to fade back enough because some schools actually let us come in with them and help with that transition. But
Hmm.
then being able to fade those ABA services back to where they can just be in a classroom setting and
Hmm.
be more independent on their own.
Yeah, that's awesome. So if families are interested in learning more about SBBC or the school readiness program, where can they find more information?
If you go to school-based behavior consultation.com, that's our website. And if anyone was interested in services, there's an intake form. And you can also just watch some videos and read the descriptions and learn about the company and the services that we offer and see the staff members and things like that.
Okay, awesome. Well, Maddie,
Yeah,
thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing your expertise. I really appreciate you taking the time to help educate our listeners on this important topic.
of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I will have in the description the contact information and any associated websites for SBBC. So if any of the listeners are interested in looking for that website or their program and information associated with that, you can look in the description. Thank you guys for listening to another episode of Neuro-Spectrum Conversations. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe and share it with someone who might find it helpful. We'll see you next time.